and welcome to the Divorce Lab. We're a group of independent professionals working to help educate the public on various topics related to divorce. I am Carrie Goldring, a certified divorce lending professional who specializes in mortgage planning.
And I'm Mark Avezai. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst. I work primarily in Troy, Michigan.
Hi, I'm Jim Chryssikos. I'm a family law attorney and mediator located in Troy, Michigan. So let's get started with today's show.
Welcome to the Divorce Lab. Today, we're going to talk about child support, and we're going to look at it from a perspective from an attorney, a financial planner, and me, how you qualify for a mortgage. So Jim, why don't you first start and tell us about what is basically child support and when do you get it?
Sure. So child support is in Michigan. It's determined by a formula that's been enacted by the state legislature. Obviously, child support is support for the children as is intended to cover all of the children's basic necessities. So food, shelter, up to an extent, healthcare, and to be ordered in every case where there are minor children. And there are rules in terms of it be waived, can it be modified, can you deviate from the formula? There are all sorts of laws and statutes that address that. And it's payable up until a child's 18th birthday, or it can go beyond 18 if the child is still enrolled full-time in school and anticipated to graduate all the way up to 19 and a half years old.
Mark, will you go over how you use it in a budget?
So what we typically will do with clients is ask them if they can, or we'll help them figure it out, to create a budget. And one will be a budget for themselves and one will be a budget for the children. And frequently what we'll find out is there's an overlap or double counting of child expenses from a couple getting divorced. And so we want to really make sure we understand what is an individual's expense, what is a child's expense, so we can differentiate the two. Support then will help us understand how much is going to go toward actual expenses, and in some cases, what is kind of left over for the spouse.
And then I'm going to go over how we look at it in terms of mortgage approval and where the planning comes in. So there are different types of mortgages. When you're doing a conventional mortgage, you have to receive the income for 6 months, and it must continue after your mortgage closes for the next 3 years. And it has to be put in your own bank account. It cannot be a joint bank account, or it will not be considered income to you. So how do you verify that you received it? Either you get a printout from friend of the court, you show bank statements that it's been deposited into your account, and then we have to pay attention to how old the children are. So if you have a 16-year-old, we're probably not counting that as income because it's not going to last for 3 years. And then some people get confused and think, oh, well, I have to receive it for 3 years. But remember, you have to receive for 6 months, and it must continue for 3 years after mortgage closing. And you may need time in between then to either purchase a home, have your home inspection, get your mortgage approval, and all that other stuff. So a good rule of thumb is just to assume that you need a 4-year period.
So you're saying that if you have a 16-year-old and there's child support awarded to that parent cannot include that income for mortgage purposes because it's going to end before the 3 years.
Correct.
Okay. And then my other question was, you said it can't go into a joint bank account. Now, I assume you mean certainly it can't go into a joint bank account with the other parent, but what if that recipient is remarried and they have a joint bank account with their new spouse? Could the child support be deposited into that account?
I'd rather it not,
Okay.
because what if you're going to apply for a mortgage, but your new spouse isn't going to apply for the mortgage? It just gets a little messier. And then the underwriter is the ultimate decision maker, and an underwriter is a person, and every person looks at things a little bit differently. So to be safe, I would put it in your own bank account.
And of course, once they're approved for the mortgage,
They can do whatever
They
they
can do
want.
whatever they want. This is
After
just
closing, not after approval.
Right.
Some people, get approved and then they're like, oh, I can quit my job. No, you can't.
okay.
But after closing, you get the keys to the house, then we're not monitoring you. It's important that it be received on time. So the underwriter is also going to look at that. Now, when you have a government loan, they only need you to receive it for 3 months instead of 6 months. So you could do things a little bit quicker. And with the FHA loans, if you're not consistent in getting the amount of child support because somebody doesn't pay on time or happens, they will average your child support where they will not on conventional. So there's a couple different nuances depending on what you're doing.
Raises another issue, and that is, how does child support get paid from the payer to the recipient? So most commonly and more frequently, people are using either bank-to-bank transfers, like a bank transfer on the 1st or 15th, or both 1st and 15th of each month, or people are starting to use like Zelle for their child support payments. And then, of course, it can go through the friend of the court, where it's payroll deducted from the payer, and then it's deposited into the recipient's account, which you really don't have any control over when that happens. It's based on when the payer gets their paycheck.
Right.
So-
It's tough too I'm not 100% familiar with Zelle. I'm more familiar with Venmo, but it could sit in your Venmo account for a long time, right? Before ever going into your bank account.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to have the conversation up front, and why I love to talk to people at the very beginning of their whole divorce process, because all these things matter. And the bottom line is, you have to be able to verify that you received and the money has hit your bank account. You can't like get a bunch of checks and save them up and go, look, I have all these checks, so I received child support. They have to be deposited. So if you can verify that you've received these payments, then it doesn't matter where they go. The hardest one is when people get loaded up on a debit card, because it's really hard to show the statement of the balance of the debit card. That's the trickiest.
How often do you see that, Carrie?
Not often, and I don't like those debit cards, but people are using them. But you have to document everything. And I always tell everybody, treat the underwriter like a kindergartner. Make it really, really simple. This is how the money started. This is how I received it. This is how it got deposited. You have to really be able to document every step of the way. That's why I like friend of the court.
Just to clarify, everything that I say in terms of the Michigan child support formula and the laws regarding child support, everything is Michigan specific, because we're located in Michigan. Other states have their own laws in terms of how child support is calculated and all the various rules. So anything you hear coming out of my mouth is Michigan specific. But Carrie, I think the things that you're saying, are they limited to Michigan? I wouldn't think so.
No, they're not. Child support and being taxable and non-taxable, how does that?
We don't give tax advice, but we do not believe that child support is taxable.
I don't give tax advice either, but I can tell you child support is not taxable. As of 2018, spousal support, alimony, is not taxable either. That used to be taxable, but that changed under the new tax law. So as we sit here today, neither child support nor spousal support are taxable income to the recipient, and they are not deductible to the payer.
So going back, Carrie, going back to your comment before about budgets, one of the things that we will do is if a client is working, we'll take their wages, we will back out taxes, we'll add in then any spousal support or child support, so that we have an idea of what the actual after-tax income is coming in, and then figure out what the budget is on top of that, because obviously taking into account taxes is important where they apply.
What about, I just thought about what we're talking about, somebody like receiving his income. What about the person paying child support? You just look at it as a debt?
Yeah, it's whatever the amount is that they're paying, that's the amount that is going out of their income. And so that would just be a negative to their income line.
Okay, I look at it as a debt also, but no timeline. So as soon as they're divorced and that child support payment is due, it's a debt right off the bat.
And then we haven't spent a lot of time talking about how is it calculated. So I think it's important for people to know that there is this formula, like I said at the beginning, it's established by the legislature, but how we actually calculate it, there's a couple software programs out there that most judges, attorneys, mediators use, one of which is a free public calculator for the state of Michigan. And if you just Google state of Michigan free child support calculator, it'll pop right up. It's from the state of Michigan website, and you can go through it. It's a little cumbersome, but if you're patient and you have all the information you need, you can get through it. Or most commonly, people will reach out to an attorney, and I have a software that I pay for that I put in all the data points and gives me the figure in pretty short order. So we have to make some assumptions, though, when we're calculating child support. So especially at the beginning of a case or at a consultation, we have to know what everybody's making, have to know how many children there are. That's usually not a problem. But then we also have to estimate what's the parenting schedule going to be. And then there are a lot of other things that we have to put in, our health insurance premium costs, daycare expenses, if there are any. But the biggest variable that can change, of course, is the parenting time, because at the beginning of the case, we don't always know for sure what it's going to be. So what I often do at a consultation is I'll run it maybe 2 or 3 different ways. So, all right, well, this is what it would be if it was 50-50. Then I'll rerun it and say, this is what it would be if it were a couple other variations of parenting time. And when we know what the schedule is and we know what everybody's income is, then the child support is pretty, I don't want to say set in stone, because you can deviate for good reason, but there's not a lot of flexibility in the child support like there is for, say, spousal support, because it's based on this formula.
Question.
Yeah.
What about if someone's income is changing and the whole modifiable, or maybe another question, what if someone just doesn't pay? What happens?
Well, let's start with the modifiability. So child support has to be modifiable. Once in a blue moon, if you've got like a 17-and-a-half-year-old, you just say, hey, we're going to just pay it as a lump sum because that child's going to graduate in 6 months or less. But for the most part, child support is always modifiable because circumstances could change. Parents' incomes can change. Child's expenses could change. So it has to be modifiable. The court would not approve child support that was non-modifiable, which is different than spousal support. You can do that for spousal support.
So how do you change child support? You go back to your attorney?
To change child support there's a few different ways you can do it. Number one, if you're using friend of the court services after the divorce is final to pay the child support, then the friend of the court is also available to do a review every 2-3 years. And often people will get a notification that they're eligible for a review, and they may take them up on it or they may not. If you think there's a change that would require more immediate attention, then you could talk to your attorney. We can do some discovery. We may have to file a motion to modify it based on what you believe the change in circumstances is. It's a lot easier if the change in circumstances was on my client's part as opposed to the other party, because if my client, say, for example, loses his or her job, I know what's going on. Whereas if the other parent got a big promotion or a pay raise, we don't always know exactly. So sometimes we just have to file the motion or reach out if they still have an attorney and find out, can you tell us something about what's going on with the income, and see if we can resolve it without going to court. But sometimes you have to file the motion to modify support, set a hearing, and then in the meantime, you can try to do a little discovery and obtain that information so that you can recalculate it.
So quick question about income.
Yeah.
Right. Let's say somebody's making $100,000. If they get a raise to 110, is that going to be a cause to go back and try to modify, or do they have to be at like 200 before that?
About 5% swing is about right. I mean, it depends how much they're making. I mean, if they're making 60,000 and they jump to 65,000, probably not a big change. But if they're making 260 and they jump to to 325 or something like that, sure, it's going to make a big change. So the good thing is it takes very little time for me to run the calculations. So we can run it, say, I think he or she is making this now. I say, well, all right, well, let's run it a few different ways and we'll look at the different scenarios. You know, we're trying to make sure it's worthwhile before we spend a lot of money on legal fees or time in court. I think the most common reason, if you have a serious change in your income or employment, termination of employment, or a big change in the parenting schedule, those are kind of the occasions where you would really want to make sure that you take a hard look at the child support. A little bump or a little decline in income, not always appropriate to pursue it, or not. Most people decide not to pursue it for the reasons you said. It's just not significant enough. But if you lose your job, or if you have a major change in your parenting schedule, it's certainly worthwhile.
If someone becomes married, does their spouse go into any of these calculations?
No.
How you spend that money, is anyone watching? Does it have to specifically be for child? Could it go towards your mortgage payment? How is that looked at?
Because the support is for the general needs of the child, there's really no investigation of how the money is spent. And I have had that come up, but judges and friend of the court people are generally not interested in looking under the hood and seeing how are people spending the child support money. It's sort of just presumed that you have a certain amount of expenses and you're getting this amount of money in support. It all benefits the household and as a result, the child or the children. Now, there are occasions where you would, over and above child support, you would want some provision in the final support order regarding, say, for example, extracurricular activities, which aren't necessarily included in child support. So a lot of times couples will say, we're going to divide up extracurricular in this percentage, either 50-50 or some other percentage. Daycare, sometimes people do verify, okay, we're each going to pay 50% of the daycare expense, or it's going to come out of, we each pay for our own daycare on our own time. So some of the peripheral expenses, you can verify where they're going and that they're being paid, but the general support amount, no.
Mark, anything else you want to add?
I think it is important when you have multiple children and you're receiving support for multiple children. One of the things that most people overlook is what is going to happen in the future and what is my budget going to look like in the future as children start to phase out of the support phase. But in a lot of cases, there are still expenses, whether the kids are still living with you or going to college or whatever the case is. And it's important to start to figure out what things are going to look like down the road. And some of the things that we help people with is projections for the future that is different than the areas of expertise for most other individuals, other professionals who help out throughout the divorce.
That's a good point, because that happens a lot, especially like the healthcare lasts till they're 26, and then you have the cell phone and the car insurance and all that fun.
Thank you for listening to us today. You can find us on the divorcelab.com. You can feel free to take a look at our other episodes, and you can also leave some questions or comments for us on there as well.